Welcome back to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. This is part 3 of the ZF6 swap series. In the last video we just kind of covered the flywheel, clutch, and the pedals and a couple other little things. In this episode we're going to start covering some other things. We're going to finish up the pedals, and I think I get into the wiring and stuff on that too a little bit. So grab a beverage and enjoy. Now we can put our spring back in this. Let's get it kind of lined up there, and then when you push the pedal down, it just snaps itself back into place. Now we can install our brake pedal, and hopefully that goes a little easier than removing it did, and hopefully easier than installing the clutch pedal. Alright, that wasn't too bad. Get your nuts started on the studs up top there, and then we'll go around under the hood and get our master cylinder slid back. Now we should be able to go in there and get those nuts started and start snugging everything down evenly like we did on the clutch pedal. A little trick: if your studs aren't wanting to come through enough to get the nuts started, you can just go ahead and hook that onto there, give the brake pedal a pull back towards you. Gently, of course, but that will pull it up in there. Then we can get our master cylinder hooked back up to our pedal here. So this little plastic bushing here goes in this way. And then come on. Get it pushed part way on. And then your brake switch goes this way. And that will slide in between. You can kind of see what I'm doing there. Focus. That slides up around it. Come on. You don't want to have it slid all the way on yet, the rod, because it'll have to go through the switch. And once you get it up there, go ahead and push it on over, and then grab your little pin thing and just drop it in. It is incredibly difficult to do while holding a camera. Now we can start getting some more of the automatic specific stuff out of the way, like the shifter and the gear indicator up here. Obviously you're going to have to get these shrouds off first. Mine are obviously already off, but they're pretty simple. There's 3 screws on the bottom. They're just a Phillips head screw. And then to get the top one off, you're going to have to stick the key in the ignition and turn it to the run position. And then right there, you'll just push up on that and then pull the whole ignition cylinder out. Then you can pull the top part of the shroud off. So to get the shifter off, you just unhook this wire here, and then you'll drive this pin out of here, and then that piece will come off. Once you get the pin out, just wiggle it and give it a pull. Now to remove some more of the automatic specific stuff. It's a lot easier if you just drop the steering column, which is pretty simple. There's 4 bolts or 4 nuts. There'll be one right there, and then 2 near the back. You can kind of see them from this angle a little better. The back 2 I didn't completely remove. Never mind the rat's nest of wiring. I'm going to be fixing that as well while I'm in here. It was 10 years ago I did this and didn't really know what I was doing. So anyway, you can get the front 2 completely off and then just loosen the back 2 to help hold it up, and then just let it sit like this. Then we can take these 2 off, and then these 2 back here, and also those 2, and we can remove the shifter and the brake interlock switch right there. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I probably could have done this first, but come up underneath here and unhook that. That's for the shift indicator. And then on this thing here, that is a 5.5 millimeter. Go ahead and take that off. There's also one more screw right back here that I forgot about. Take that one out too. Once you get the screws out of that, you can just lift this up, and there's a wiring plug right here. That's for the brake interlock switch. Obviously, we don't need that anymore. And then the whole shift linkage thing comes out. And then depending on the level of detail you want to go into on this, like I'm wanting to be very detailed and pretty much look like it came out of the factory with a manual. Come out here to your parts truck, which hopefully you have one so you can get all this stupid little crap, and take this thing here. And then we're also going to take this, which is also T30. Then next, this part's optional, but take this piece out here. You don't have to remove it, but it makes a little bit of noise, and I can see that driving me nuts going down the road if I can even hear it over the sound of the engine, which is probably unlikely, but I'm getting a little OCD here. Getting that out, you have to take the pin that's through it and actually drive it to the right, which is rather difficult, but I've already got mine to move some, so with enough patience and little picks and screwdrivers and whatever, you can get it to slide over and come out. But to get that piece out, I just took this little pick and just kind of worked it in there and just pushed in and turned at the same time and got it to come out. And then what you can do too is take some of this grease and stuff that's on here and put it down in here where the new piece is going to be sliding. And we can take this little doohickey, and it just drops down in there. That little piece sticking off of it there goes in where that pin was. There we go. And then grab this piece here. And then the spring will actually just go down on that. And once you tighten the bolt down, it'll hold it there. And just lightly snug that up. Doesn't need much. And then make sure it all works. It's just a little safety thing to keep you from being able to turn the ignition all the way back. Alright, then we can reach up in here now and just pop this thing out, your gear indicator. Just squeeze it on the side, and it pops out. Or you could leave it just to screw with people. And then we can take our blank piece here, which alternatively you can just take this apart and spray paint over the lettering. I've done that before too. Did that on my buddy's truck that we did a ZF swap on because he didn't have this piece. You could also probably order one of these. There's a part number for it if you need it. But either way, just take it and just snap it back up in there. There you go. This isn't exactly related to the swap, but it's a good idea to do while you're in here. I've seen on multiple trucks where this little clip here that holds it on has a real bad tendency to break off. And if that ends up coming unplugged, you end up losing your turn signals. So all I did, obviously, was just took a zip tie and wrapped it around it, and that'll hold it in.
It has been a long few years back. Yep.
It'd be funny if it slid right in.
It would. It'd be awesome too. Oh. She's going.
It still needs to go down.
Does it?
Or up, actually.
Let me see if I can get a bolt started here. Not quite enough yet. When you put yours in, do the very bottom bolt. So you can probably just go ahead and get it slid in there. That way we can try to draw it in with it. Once we get a certain point, obviously. Oh, I just went into my dowel pin.
Did you?
Yep.
Ooh. Well, I got a couple threads started.
All right. Oh, yeah. Did yours just slide really far too?
Yeah.
Ah! What the fuck just happened?
Clear my ear. Training fluid.
What'd you do? Knock the earplug out of the line?
I think so. Yep. Went right in my ear.
And then once you've got the transmission up here and slid up by hand most of the way onto the dowel pins and getting close to the block, you can start threading in your bell housing bolts and just kind of work it in there or work the transmission back and forth. And another tip too is when you're getting it slid in there, grab a hold of the output shaft here and spin it some. That way the splines on the input shaft will line up with the clutch plate. And then you'll torque your 6 bolts down to 46 foot-pounds. And then once you get it here, you can go ahead and get your cross member put in, which we're going to do now. Now some little tips on getting the cross member in here. You know, obviously get your transmission lifted up high enough, and then if you're putting an automatic in, you'll use the front 2 holes. If you're doing a manual, you use the 2 holes on the rear of the cross member. And then you can just hold it up on this side here, set this side here on the frame, and then get your bolts just drop down in there. And then while you're still holding it, you can come over here and just get one of the bolts just slid through there to hold it. And then grab your little triangle piece here Get that stuck up in here on the inside of the frame rail. It'll be crooked to start with, but get one of the bolts started in that, and then you can pull this other bolt out and get it started into the triangle. This is just holding the cross member up for now so it doesn't drop on your face. To demonstrate it, that's what it's going to look like for the moment. And then pull that one out. And then we'll rotate that over and get that bolt started. And then we can get our other top one too. All right, then once you got everything started here, the little flanges on these, they're supposed to be oriented that way. Top ones, you can't really see it because I've got this other cross piece in here, but the little wings that come off of it are sitting down inside the channels of this piece of the cross member. And then once everything is snugged up a little bit, you torque them down to 60 foot-pounds. And then these three here also get torqued to 60 foot-pounds. All right, then once your cross member bolts are all torqued down, I haven't tightened these up yet, but you can do that now if you want, or wait. I would wait until after you do this step. You just go ahead and lower it back down, set it back down, and then we can get the transmission jack out of here. And then you can go ahead and torque these down once the weight's on it. Now I'd recommend putting some grease on your output shaft here to help lube it up. Makes assembly a little easier and also prevents corrosion. Make all the dirty jokes you want there. Then it's a good idea to put some grease in here too. Again, insert dirty joke here. And then go ahead and get your gasket put on there. And then, probably with help from a friend, get the transfer case lifted up in there. It is possible to do it by yourself, but it's incredibly difficult. This is something that I failed to mention during the initial filming of this project, but it's extremely important info. If you don't have a transfer case from a ZF6 equipped donor truck, yours that was behind your auto will not work without modifications. The easiest route by far is just to get a transfer case from a ZF truck. However, it is possible to make the one from the auto work. I know this because I've done it. Literally the only difference between the two is the spline count for the input shaft, but that means in order to make the one from the auto work behind a ZF is you have to change out the input shaft to one with the proper spline count. And the problem with doing that, for one, is that it pretty much requires you to completely disassemble the transfer case, and there's some very, very stiff snap rings in there. It's a pain. I wouldn't recommend doing it, but it is possible if you really feel the need to do it. And the other problem is, though, too, is that those input shafts, last time I checked, they're not exactly cheap. So do what you want to do, use your own judgment. But the important part is be aware that your automatic transfer case will not work without modifying it. All right, now we can go ahead and get our bolts started, and just start with the top two to help draw everything together, close that gap. And thing I forgot to mention earlier, when you're doing your cross member, if you have manual linkage, make sure you have it going back before you put the cross member on, because that's not going to work. So I'm going to just end up taking it off of the transmission up there and moving it around. Then your transmission to transfer case bolts, those are 13 mil and 37 foot-pounds, if you can actually torque it down. Next time I'm definitely going to go ahead and just put the transfer case on before I put the transmission in, because some of these bolts are really going to suck to try to get a wrench on. So obviously on this side, these 3 bolts here, you can get a torque wrench on them pretty easy. The other side over here, if you were to remove that heat shield, it'd probably be pretty easy, but who wants to screw with that? Definitely not me. With a U-joint and an extension, you can get to that one. And also, The other one, might be able to see it there. Yeah, kind of see it. But basically what you can do is use your torque wrench over here and just kind of get a feel for what 37 foot-pounds is if you actually feel like torquing it. And just kind of go from there on the wrench. It's going to be pretty tight. You know, the bolt's going to be pretty dang tight. Probably about as tight as you're going to get it with a 13 mil wrench with your hand up in there. All right, next, this is optional to do this now. You don't have to do this now. You can do this later on if you want. You can do this last. But I just chose to do it since I was already down here. But now you can go ahead and get your rear drive shaft on. And if you're putting the same transfer case back in, line your marks up that you made on the original, when you originally took it out. In my case, it's a different transfer case. So I'll just put it on there and hopefully it doesn't vibrate. If it does, I'll try clocking it. Worry about that part later. But whenever you do decide to do your drive shaft, on the rear here it's 76 foot-pounds. And I'll get you the torque specs for the back here in a second. I think it was 26 if you have the split pin yoke like I do. I'll pull that page up here in a minute and show you. So I figured now was a good time to go ahead and fix my idiot mistake of having this bar hanging down before I put the cross member in. To fix that, all I did, you know, you may want to pull this off for another reason. It's a good time to change your bushings in here if you want to. I'm not, but if you want to, I would do it now. But just take this bolt out and it just pops off. That is a 13/16, or it's actually probably a 21 millimeter, because, you know, everything else on this truck is metric. But 13/16 and 21 are pretty much the same, and it works. And I don't have a 21 millimeter wrench, and I didn't feel like trying to get a socket in there. So 13/16 wrench worked great. And then just go ahead and tighten that up to, I don't know, snug. I'm sure there's a torque spec for it, but I don't really care at this point. Just don't be dumb with it. And then we can get our linkage hooked up. Maybe. And just give it a, might have to whack it a little bit, but it'll slide on there. So the last time I did a ZF6 swap, I actually took the factory automatic transmission wiring harness and made the necessary modifications to it to make it work, and we were keeping the electronic shift on the fly stuff. Well, in my case here, I'm getting rid of the ESOF system, and I'm also just going to be trying to use the wiring harness from the manual truck. So since I'm switching over to a manual shift transfer case, you can actually go ahead and remove these. This is just the relay blocks for that. And also the left two plugs there that I've already got undone. Go ahead and unhook those. And I've got the rest of the wiring already unhooked. So we can just probably go down below and fish that harness out and then hook in the harness from the manual truck, the parts truck. So as I said a minute ago, I was going to pull up the page that had all the torque specs for your drive shafts and stuff. When I go ahead and put the front shaft in, I probably won't be having it in right away because I'm going to be taking it to the shop to get rebuilt and rebalanced and everything for the front. But here's this page here. So, you know, you got a carrier bearing. That's torque spec for that, 46 foot-pounds on your, yeah. You can just look at this and figure it out. When I get to the front drive shaft, I'm not even going to record that because there's not really any point, because you can pretty much figure it out from here. Obviously, front drive shaft, rear drive shaft. This is to the transfer case. Not really sure why they're different torque specs, but that's what the book says, so that's what we're going to roll with. Yeah, that's the 26 foot-pounds right there for the drive shaft to front axle. That's because it has a split pin yoke where it's got the little straps and the bolts that go over the U-joint. To the rear axle, if you have a round flange, which I believe is more so on the dualies, I could be wrong on that, but you got 82 foot-pounds there, which that'd be if, you know, you have the 12 millimeter 12-point bolts. The split pin yoke, 26 foot-pounds again. just like on the front. And yeah, that right there should be all of the torque specs you need for the drive shafts. I might put those in the description as well if I feel up to it. Alright, so I've got the wiring harness from the manual parts truck put on here. As you can kind of see it off to the right. If you look right about there, you can see that the one plug on the factory up there isn't actually hooked up to anything anymore. So got it all hooked up and ran in. My reverse light plug is completely destroyed, so I'll have to be fixing that at a later time, so I won't have reverse lights for a while, but whatever, I'll deal with that. Honestly, at this point, I have no idea if this is actually going to work. I'm hoping it does without any kind of weird service engine lights or a bunch of random codes in the PCM, but we'll find that out once I fire it up and actually start driving it. That hole right there, that's where the shift linkage went through for the automatic. I've got some plugs coming for that, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So now I'm going to mess with the transmission cooler lines. As you can see, the automatic line, this is the cooler feed line. On the ZFs, the bottom port is the out and the top one is the return. So you can reuse the automatic lines here. That's what I'm going to do, just very gently bend them to where they need to go. The return line is going to be a little interesting because, on the automatics it comes all the way back here. But if you can put a big loop in it, you can just bring it right back up to here. That's how we did it when I did the ZF swap on my buddy's truck. And that's what I'm going to do with this one, because the cooler lines that were on this trans were pretty well screwed. Alright, so once you're done, you should have something that looks kind of similar to this. I had to tweak this one, tweak the bottom one a little bit more. The cooler feed line, I had to bend it a little bit more to make it match up. And this line here had a little bit of a downward bend. I straightened that out a little bit and even kind of bent it back up a little bit. And the most significant difference is what I did here. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it'll work just fine. I'm certain I'll never have any issues with this. And there's no kinks in the line. And this, with the automatic transmission, there was one of these on there. I decided that this was a good time to go ahead and replace it. It's just a inline magnetic filter. Magnifying, I think, was who made it. The original one, this one says Ray Bestis on it, but doesn't really matter. I figured it's another layer of protection for the trans. That's actually on the return line here, as you can see, going up to the top. If you have a tubing bender for this part of the job, I would highly recommend you use it, because if you kink these lines, you're pretty well screwed. Like I said, none of mine, I tweaked them quite a bit. Obviously this line here, the return line, used to be straight and went back to here. I just took some careful measurements, and it'll take a little bit of trial and error and just kind of eyeballing stuff and praying you got it right. If you have a setup like this here with this filter, that gives you a little bit of extra room to play with if you need to. If you bend it in the wrong spot, you might be able to, bring it up a little bit. Whatever. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Just don't kink the lines, whatever you do, and don't split them. Next, we can go ahead and install the master and slave assembly onto the truck. If you got one off of a parts truck and you're not really sure of the condition of it, I would go ahead and just replace it with a new OEM one. There are aftermarket options available, but from what I've seen, they're all junk. You're best off just going with Motorcraft. I think it was like 125 bucks, something like that. Pre-bled, you just pop it in and go. So installing it's a little bit tricky. It's been a long time since I've done it, so I couldn't remember exactly which way it was routed, so I had to have quite a bit of trial and error to figure out which way it needed to be routed to not be rubbing on stuff. So I'm not going to pull it back off and show you how to install it step by step, but I'll just kind of give you an overview here. So what I found to be the easiest thing to do was get the master cylinder snapped in first, then go ahead and get your reservoir put up, and then put your slave cylinder in, which we'll go down there in just a minute. As far as the hose routing goes, I found that everything worked best coming off the reservoir here, going underneath the hydro boost unit, and then obviously up there into the master cylinder. And to install the master, it's kind of goofy. That was one of the issues I was having. Like I said, it's been a long time. It actually locks in counterclockwise rather than clockwise. So you'll actually spin it about 45 degrees clockwise, get it slid into the hole there, and then you're going to rotate it 45 degrees to the left. And there's also a little bit of alignment stuff in there. I'll go inside and show you. Yeah, you can see the bottom right corner is kind of flattened off. It's less pointy. You'll need to make note of that when you install the master, because as you can see there at the very bottom of the master, that corner is kind of flattened off as well. That's the only way you're going to be able to get it in there. So you got to make sure you align that, and then it'll slide in, and then you make, from the outside of the truck, you will turn it counterclockwise to lock it in. And now I'm going to try to show you how the line runs down to the slave cylinder. Is that politically correct these days to call it a master and slave, or are we calling it something different now? So you can kind of see how it's ran down there. And then we'll go underneath the truck. All right, now underneath the truck, it's this right here. And my truck already had it. I don't know if that's exactly what that's for, to hold this up or not, but if not, it works pretty conveniently for it. And then your slave cylinder here, that just goes in there and locks in clockwise. And I'm actually going to pull that back out here in just a second. I just pulled it out because I wanted to show you this. On the brand new ones, there's these little plastic straps here. Leave those intact. That's actually going to help you assemble it. And I'd recommend putting a little dab of grease on the end of it just to reduce wear and maybe give some smoother engagement. But what these little straps do is these actually holds the rod back into the slave cylinder, so that when you go to install this up against your clutch fork there, it's not giving you extra resistance. So just leave those go, and then you'll take it and just put it in there. Just rotate it clockwise, and it doesn't really feel like it's engaged too well, but once the slave cylinder is actually broke from those tabs, it'll kind of stiffen it up a little bit. But, it's normal for it to be a little loose right now. And those tabs, the first time you push on the clutch pedal, it will break those tabs free. So you'll hear a pop, totally normal, don't worry about it. That's it. And now it functions normally. All right, so now we can come up here into the truck and get our master cylinder rod attached. So you get your rod on there into the master, and then just take a push on the clutch pedal, and you'll hear it snap in. And there you go. Now the master's ready to go. Now we can go ahead and install our clutch safety switch, which I don't have one, but I can kind of explain it to you a little bit here. All it does, there's a little tab right here that will, it's kind of an orientation tab and helps lock it into place. It's just a little spring-loaded little thingy. And the wiring harness will go up once it's all done, but you can rotate it down, plug your wire harness in, and then just flip it back around. And if doing the ZF swap here, the wiring harness for that is actually already in the truck, and it's plugged in right here. This guy right here is actually for the clutch safety switch, so you can just unclip it from there. Since I don't have a clutch safety switch, I'm going to end up just jumping some wires for the time being. Eventually I will be putting a clutch safety switch on it, because I would like to have my cruise control kick off when I hit the clutch. So I'm doing some editing on the video right now and figured this was a good point to take a brief pause here and explain exactly what I did with this clutch safety switch thing. So in the end, I never did end up getting a safety switch put on it. After a little bit of driving, I realized that it was not necessary. So all I ended up doing was just leaving it sit just like it is on the video here. I left it clipped to the little bracket in there and just leave this jumper box thing on it because that jumps the wires for you. You don't have to do any extra wiring or anything like that. Just leave it just how it is. Yes, the truck will start in gear. Don't be stupid. Take your truck and put it in neutral before you turn the key. You should always do that anyway. And as far as the cruise control goes, if you push the clutch in while the cruise is on, it will still kick the cruise off. The PCM can sense the slight jump in RPMs. I think it jumps up like maybe 50 RPM, maybe 100. Either way, it's pretty insignificant. And like I said, it still kicks the cruise off. Like I said, truck will still start in gear, but just don't ever do it. I've actually had it in the past where I had a vehicle that the clutch failed on it. I pushed the clutch in and it was still in gear, but the clutch was still engaged. And guess what? The vehicle moved when I hit the key. So don't be stupid. Always put the vehicle in neutral before you start it.